Chapter 15. After supper, Sergeant Gridley handed Mike a pair of wool and rubber blankets and a thick packet of envelopes. "Mail from your family," he said with a smile. "Since we are waiting for further word of your whereabouts, I didn't return the letters with letters of condolence. So as far as your family is concerned, you've remained safe and sound." As Mike clutched the letters eagerly, the sergeant added, "I've assigned you to Harley's tent. Got a good night's sleep and a good breakfast in the morning, and we'll send you off with as much food as we can spare and a bedroll for your parting gift." Mike spread out the blankets and sat upon them, cross-legged, happily reading his mail. Maud had written 4 letters, each of which included notes from Peg. Louisa, Frances, and Megan had written 3 times. Danny had written just once. There was a letter from the captain, now Major Taylor, and Mike tore the envelope open with trembling fingers. What if the Major was displeased with him? After reading a few words, Mike settled down comfortably. Major Taylor had written his feelings the way any father would have. "I understand your eagerness to serve the Union, and I'm proud of you for it," the Major wrote. "However, you're but a boy. I'm greatly concerned for your safety. When your 90-day contract's up, I want you to return to Fort Leavenworth." That was advice, lots of it, in the strong fatherly love that came through every word. Mike yearned for the war to end and for Major Taylor to return to Fort Leavenworth. More than anything, Mike wanted a father close at hand. The remaining letters were warm and worried in tone. Each shared small, funny family doings, as well as concerns about local problems or the actions of Southern sympathizers. Danny's foster parents had been taunted repeatedly by a neighbor who resented their stand for the Union. Danny complained bitterly about being too young to join the Union Army. "Whatever you do, Mike, that's what I want to do too," Danny wrote, bragging. "I've been practicing with Alfred's rifle. You'd be surprised what a good shot I am." But Mike was far from sorry that Danny wasn't using that rifle in battle. It was with a great sense of relief Mike visualized his once tag-along younger brother safely at home with Alfred and Annie Swenson to take care of him. With any luck, the war would be over soon, and Danny would never see the horrors that Mike had seen, or be surrounded by terrors like those Mike could never forget. Mike had no sooner finished reading the letters than Billy Whitley settled down next to him. Billy held out some papers, envelopes, and a pencil. "In case you don't have any writing materials left, I'm glad to let you share mine." "I can pay you," Mike offered, thinking of the money in his pocket, but Billy shook his head. "No need to. In return, you can do me a small favor." "Glad to," Mike said easily. "What is it?" Billy pulled out a thin gold pocket watch with a delicately etched design on its lid and held it out, dangling on its chain. "I've been thinking about Todd's watch and what's come of it, instead of his sister getting it the way Todd wanted. This is my pa's watch. There's no reason for me to be taking it into battle, maybe losing it, or maybe get a bullet ruining it, when by all rights my wife Aggie should have it." He looked at Mike pleadingly. "Will you take it to Aggie for me? She's gone with the children to stay with relations on St. Joe. If you're going through St. Joe, you could deliver it easy." Mike nodded. "Write down your wife's name and where I can find her. I'll get the watch to her." "Thanks." Billy clapped a hand on Mike's shoulder and immediately set about writing the address, along with a note to Aggie. He put the papers with the watch inside the envelope. Mike tucked the envelope into his pocket and began to answer the letters. As he wrote, Mike thought about the sad eyes of the girl who had given him a drink of water, and her husband. There was not much to write about, but so much to tell. There was so much to write about, so much to tell, but Mike only wrote that he had rejoined his company and would be soon to be discharged and sent home. In his letter to his mother, he added he'd stop off in St. Joe for a few days to visit. In his letter to Danny, he wrote that he would be in St. Joe. He'd make a trip to the Swensons' farm so the two of them could be together, even if just for a little while. In the morning after breakfast, Mike left camp with his papers and provisions and caught a ride with a sutler traveling to Jefferson City. The hilly countryside with its splotches of sunlight meadows and shade-cool forest was beautiful, and the sutler confided to Mike that he was glad to have company on the long trip. "If we meet up with any Confederate patrols, I've got a near-empty wagon and a small amount of cash in my pocket." He winked and added, "Just enough to satisfy them, so they'll take it and let us go on our way." To Mike's relief, they did not meet up with a Confederate soldier, and by the end of the day they arrived without mishap in Jeff City, as the sutler called it. Even though the town was the capital of Missouri and probably bustling with business during daylight hours, at this time and late in the evening not too many people were out on the streets. Mike stopped at a shopkeeper who was locking his doors to ask if Jefferson City was still under General Fremont's control, only to discover that Fremont's army had left the camp and had begun its trek south to Springfield. "Now, if it's the Confederate soldiers you're looking for, you're in better luck," the shopkeeper told Mike with a wink and a teasing grin. "A couple of patrols came here to this area, and they've been showing up here from time to time." Mike spoke up boldly, his mind on Jerry. "Where would I find these Confederates?" The shopkeeper looked at Mike in surprise. "If I were you, I wouldn't try too hard to find them," he said. "They're much more likely to find you." But Mike searched for the rebels nonetheless, walking in the streets where the taverns were to be found, looking in vain for horses with Confederate trappings. His wanderings took him down to a landing where, among countless riverboats, a large stern-wheeler was moored. Its white paint gleamed brightly in the light from the dockside oil lamps. Mike leaned against the shuttered storefront in the shadows, awed by the ornate three-story floating giant. Suddenly a slender figure appeared near the empty deck of the nearest boat and ran down the narrow gangplank to the door, pausing under one of the hanging oil lamps. "Jim?" Mike whispered as he recognized his old friend who had traveled west from him on the Orphan Train. He hurried forward, calling, "Jim! Jim Riley!" "Mike?" Jim shouted as Mike came into the pool of light. "I never thought I'd see you here." Since their last meeting, Jim had grown taller, more muscular. The sun had browned his skin. Mike clapped Jim's shoulder. Gritting, Jim poked Mike's arm with his fist. Guess you got what you wanted, Mike said, glancing at the docked paddle wielder. You told us you'd get adopted by a family who lived out on the river. Didn't work out exactly that way, Jim answered, and Mike Cobb flashed sorrow in his eyes. I ran away, drifted down here, found work as a deckhand on the Mary Belle. Jim put an arm around Mike's shoulder and guided him to a bench under one of the lamps. You're limping. What happened to you? Mike flopped on the bench next to Jim and told him briefly what had taken place since they'd parted in St. Joe. Shot in the leg in battle? Jim slowly shook his head in wonder. Mike Kelly, a drummer boy in the Union Army? Never would all the boys back in New York docks believe a wild tale like that. They laughed, but Mike soon turned serious. I'm being sent home to heal. I need to find out if there's a steamboat headed upriver to St. Joe. Jim jumped to his feet. The Mary Belle is one of the few passenger boats left after the Army commandeered most of them. And yours truly, he thumped his chest, traveling with the Mary Belle, polishing brass, oiling machinery, scrubbing decks, slaving at whatever else the second mate can come up to keep me busy for 24 hours, day and night. Mike got to his feet, balancing his knapsack and bedroll. Can I get a ticket this time of evening? Nah, but you got plenty of time, Jim told him. The Mary Belle isn't due to shove off till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. He paused and sighed. Mike, have you got a price of a ticket? Depends, Mike said. What's the cost? Cabin and 3 meals a day all the way to St. Joe's going to set you back $40 to $50. Mike whistled. Haven't got near enough. Never mind, Jim said. $7 will buy you a place to sleep outside one of the decks. Since you've got a bedroll, that shouldn't be a problem. You can bring your own food. Then Mike didn't answer. Jim said, you haven't got $7 either. Closer to 5, Mike told him. And some of that we need to buy food for the trip. Come on, Jim said cheerfully and led the way toward the darkened boat. You can sleep in my cabin tonight. And if Seth, second mate's in the same tavern he usually frequents, we'll find him and remind him that he could use another deckhand now that Oliver's quit. Jim led Mike through a tour of the boat, showing him everything from some of the fancy cabins with their chandeliers and puffy coverlets on the beds, down to the boiler room, which was more familiar to Jim. Finally, Mike and Jim settled in the cabin with space for little more than 2 bunks that nearly filled it. As they chewed hard on the tough dried beef and bread in Mike's knapsack, Mike told Jim about his friend Todd and Jerry's theft. Full of sympathy for his friend, Jim said, we'll find Seth and make sure of that job for you. He stashed Mike's knapsack under the bunk beneath his own possessions, then led the way to the tavern near the waterfront. The boys found Seth at an opportune moment. He was sitting in the tavern, complaining to his friends about the shortage of good help, so that many of the able-bodied hands off to fight war for either side. Mike had only to assure him that he was fit and hardy enough to work as a deckhand, and it was settled. He reported to work early the next morning. Once outside the tavern, Mike said, if Jerry Logan's in Jefferson City, he'll probably be with his friends gambling at one of the taverns. You have any idea which ones the Confederates go to? I might, Jim said. They follow the nearest street down 2 blocks to the large, brightly lit tavern. Flickering lamps reflected on the water, which seemed to leap and jump with flashes of light. But Mike's attention was drawn to the Confederate horses. He stopped Jim by gripping his arm. That's Jerry's horse, he whispered. Tan, white markings. I'd recognize it anywhere. Jim looked up and down the empty street before answering. No one's in sight? You want to look in the saddlebags? Mike smiled, even his pulse was racing. If I find the watch and take it, Jerry might not notice it was missing for days. He might think he lost it. I wouldn't be too sure, Jim said. You try for the watch once. If it comes up missing, first thing he's got to suspect is that you're the one who took it. That may be, Mike said, but he won't know where to find me. Mike carefully scanned the silent streets and slid quickly between the horses. Keep watch, he whispered to Jim. Although the horse blew through his nose, nervously stepped back, pulling against his tether. Mike mumbled soft, soothing sounds and firmly stroked the animal's neck till it relaxed. Still speaking low to the horse, he gradually eased his right hand toward the saddlebag and opened the clasp. Standing on tiptoe, he reached down to the bottom of the pouch. With nervous fingers, he explored inside until he touched the round cold of Todd's watch. This time Mike didn't hesitate. He grasped the watch firmly and pulled it out of the saddlebag. There was enough light to examine it thoroughly, and Mike was positive it was Todd's watch. There were tooth marks left by Todd's baby sister. It was definitely Todd's watch. Mike fastened the clasp on the pouch again and slipped the watch into the pocket of the trousers. He stepped behind the horses and rejoined Jim, who seemed to be more interested in what Mike was doing than watching the street. I've got the watch, Mike whispered. Let's go. Jim heaved a long sigh of relief. No one's in sight, he said, and took off at a run. Come on, back to the boat. Exhilarated by the triumph, Mike couldn't resist a last glance back to the tavern, but he was unprepared for the sight of the dark shape slipping from the shadows into the lamplight. The man looked directly at Mike, then turned and entered the tavern.